The third chapter of the Quran, Al-Imran, is fascinating because it seems to be telling two completely different stories at the same time. One is about ancient piety, and the other is about, well, the brutal reality of war. So today, we're going to dig into how these two very different tales are actually two sides of the very same coin.
So on one hand, you got this beautiful, almost sacred history of the family of Jesus. We're talking about his mother Mary, her parents Imran and St. Anne. It's a story all about prophets and devotion. But then the chapter just pivots hard into the gritty, life-or-death struggles of the early Muslim community, focusing on the battles of Badr and Uhud.
And that brings us to the big question, right? What's the connection here? Why would you weave these two narratives, separated by centuries, into one single chapter? Well, the answer starts with a little puzzle that's actually hidden in the chapter's name.
Yeah, the whole mystery really kicks off with the title itself, The Family of Imran. It points to a specific puzzle that scholars have debated for a long time, and it's all about the names being used for Mary's family.
Okay, so some critics, like the translator N.J. Wood, looked at this and pointed to what they saw as a pretty major historical error. He basically argued that the Quran seems to be confusing Mary, the mother of Jesus, with Miriam, the sister of Moses from the Old Testament.
Let me break it down. In the Quran, Mary is called the sister of Aaron and the daughter of Imran. Now, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, the father of Moses, Aaron, and their sister, Miriam, is named Amram, which is the Hebrew version of Imran. Here's the catch. These two women, Mary and Miriam, lived about 1,800 years apart.
Which leads to the really obvious question. Is this just a mistake? A huge genealogical mix-up in a sacred text? Well, not so fast. The modern scholarly view points to something much more sophisticated going on.
You see, the key to unlocking this whole thing isn't about checking family trees. It's about a literary device called typology. And this is where those two separate stories in the chapter really start to come together.
So, what on earth is typology? Think of it like this. It's when a text deliberately links a person or an event to an earlier one. The point isn't to say they are literally the same person, but to show that they share a spiritual quality or a similar role. It's all about creating a pattern, a sense of continuous spiritual heritage. So the bottom line from most modern scholars is this. No, the Quran isn't making a historical mistake. It's making a powerful theological point. By calling Mary daughter of Imran and sister of Aaron, the text is spiritually connecting her to that ancient, incredibly pious lineage of Moses and Aaron. It's a huge sign of honor. In fact, a famous hadith even clarifies this, explaining that it was common practice back then to name people after righteous figures from the past as a form of tribute.
Okay, so we've kind of solved the naming puzzle. But that brings us right back to our bigger question. Why connect this whole story of spiritual lineage to a bunch of battles? Well, the answer is all about timing, specifically when this chapter was revealed.
You have to remember, this chapter came to Muhammad's community during a time of intense crisis. I mean, they had just had this unbelievable against all odds victory at the Battle of Badr, only to be followed by a truly devastating setback at the Battle of Uhud. Their faith and their actual survival were on the line.
And this is where it all clicks into place. The story of Mary and the family of Imran, their piety, their complete trust in God, their perseverance. It wasn't just some old history lesson. It was a live, spiritual resource for a community that was in the thick of its own trials, reminding them that they were part of that same long, unbroken line of faith. And the chapter makes that idea of divine support incredibly vivid. The most dramatic example of this comes from its discussion of the Battle of Badr, where this tiny Muslim force was just massively outnumbered. The Quran describes God sending down reinforcements. And we're not talking about a small squad, we're talking about thousands. At one point, the text mentions a force of 5,000 angels being sent to help the believers.
Now, what's really amazing here are the details you find in Islamic tradition. These weren't just abstract forces. They were described as being led by archangels like Gabriel and Michael. They wore distinctive yellow turbans. They even took on the physical appearance of one of the most famous Muslim warriors, Zubayr bin al-Awwam. For the people on the ground, this would have been a very real, very tangible sign of God's favor.
But here's what makes this chapter so powerful. It doesn't just stick to the highlight reel of a miraculous victory. It directly confronts the despair of defeat. And that creates a much deeper, more nuanced lesson.
The chapter sets up this brilliant contrast between the two battles. Badr was this clear sign, a reward for unwavering faith, with angels coming down to help.
But Uhud was a disaster. A tactical mistake born from disobedience led to heavy losses, and the mood went from total elation to being completely disheartened. The lesson was that victory isn't a guarantee. Faith has to hold up even when you lose.
And this builds to one of the most critical theological points in the whole chapter. It says flat out that the success of the faith doesn't depend on Muhammad himself. Even if the prophet were to die in battle, the core message and the need for steadfast faith in God, that remains. It's a lesson about the movement, not just the man.
So when you put it all together, the spiritual lineage of Mary, the incredible victory at Badr, the crushing defeat at Uhud, it's all building towards one single, overarching theme.
The chapter's very last verse just says it all. This is the call to action, the big takeaway from everything that came before. The path to success, it argues, is through patience, through endurance, and by remaining steadfast.
So in the end, those two stories were never really separate. The ancient history of the family of Imran provides the spiritual blueprint, while the battles of Badr and Uhud provide the real-world test. And together, they deliver this one, unified, timeless message about what faith really is. It's proven not just in moments of miraculous victory, but in the struggle to persevere right through defeat.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If the angelic intervention was a lesson for a specific time and place, maybe the chapter's true, eternal lesson is really about perseverance. How are we meant to apply that lesson, one forged in both victory and setback, in our own lives today?